Well, I guess the phrase of the day is, silver's made of metal, stocks are made of sand. And you remember what Jimi Hendrix said about castles made out of sand. They get washed into the sea eventually, right? That's maybe what's going to happen. Stick with the tried and true. I've been reading about some other various stories. I'm looking at the markets in silver and gold and oil all dropping, and it looks like the Dow's still holding above 17,000. But, one good person to actually even look historically at who's made predictions, and he was very unpopular when the markets were high, was Grantham of Grantham Management. And he'd be warning that the PE ratios were so skewed and that, everybody made so much money and it's not going to stay that way. And now we're at the second longest bull run in the last 100 years of U.S. financial history as far as the general equities go. It's not a matter of painting a deliberate doom and gloom picture, it's painting a reality picture. It's like, how far can this go? And, back in the 20s, they had a lot more reason to have more expectation that it can go higher and higher and higher because, well, you look at the 1920s to even the 1890s, 30 years prior. We're talking like 1985 to now, say 2014 or 2015 or whatever. It's not that much of a earth-shattering difference, but if you remember back in if you don't remember, but in 1890, everybody was using horses, electricity wasn't even around, there wasn't that much machinery, there wasn't, where we had assembly line methods, standardization of machined parts, where everything was interchangeable. Those are all new things. There was so much new technology coming on at the turn of the century up to, say, the 20s. A lot of people would think that the markets can go high because we were in an age of unprecedented prosperity. And you're looking at, wow, everything's electrified. People are driving around in horseless carriages. Everybody can afford a car. Well, not everybody, but a lot of more people could afford cars because of Henry Ford. The telephone was becoming more commonplace. And the transportation of goods was much more efficient. The roadways are much more efficient. It was like, night and day. It was almost like, us traveling with to the moon and back with free energy or something. That's what a leap of technology was in the 1890s to the 20s. But even so, what happened to the stock market? It got ahead of itself. And I believe, yes, I do realize that there was a deliberate, contrived plan to the deal, too, in some ways. It's like the powers that be just would not allow for laissez-faire capitalism. Actually, if you look back in history, they say Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge were the worst presidents, but that's not true. They were actually the best presidents. And they actually, a lot of people did realize what happened during World War I, how big government had grown. But now you're looking at what government is today compared to how government grew exponentially in World War I. They backed off a lot of that. They backed off a lot of different things. So the economy took off on its own. But now we're looking at another thing which we can say justifiably is a bubble. In the 20s you can actually say, it would be hard to imagine that it would come down like the way it did because the actual stock market crash in 29 wasn't a big crash. It was a few years later where they had like a 90% correction in 1932. But, back then, if you're looking at the exponential growth of technology, like say for instance, if we were undergoing a stock market growth the way it was back then and we had free energy or something and everybody was growing the hemp product besides, and plus we had 0 point energy and we had Tesla coils producing free energy to everybody in the world, and there was all this astronomically great technology. It would be hard to believe a market correction could occur then. But that's almost akin to what was going on in the 20s, because you got to compare the technology in the 20s compared to the 1890s. It grew exponentially. So nobody believed it can crash, but it's just it's not. I think it's not just a normal cycle of things. I think it's actually, well, the bankers have actually played a big game. What was going on with the the stock market crash? They were holding up the markets artificially, and when they pulled out and they went back in, and then they pulled out again, they knew what was going on. But anyway, I don't want to dwell too much on that. But today's day and age, I was talking about tensions in the Middle East. Now I'll give you another little interesting factoid. The biggest sale of arms in 2014 from the U.S. Now, the U.S. is the number one arms, military arms exporter, and Russia is number two, right? Well, the biggest sale of arms, actually, in 2014, that was made by the U.S., was to a country, Qatar, which has about 250,000 residents, 250,000 residents. They are worried because they backed the Muslim Brotherhood and in Egypt, and that failed. So they're wondering what their neighbors are looking at, eyeing them very suspiciously. And the other one that a lot of arms went to was the United Arab Emirates. And these, what I'm seeing is, it looks like with all these arms sales, the reason they bought these arms is because they're justifiably worried about what their neighbors might do to them. And, we're not seeing this yet in the markets where the stories are, affecting the oil prices. Now, I do know the oil prices are somewhat rigged and it's a bunch of games going on, but it's underlying the surface. There's a hell of a lot more tension brewing in the Middle East than there ever has been in a long time, and it may actually hit to a crescendo that it's never been at ever, in past history. Now, I know a lot of people like to blame Israel on this and that, but I could tell you, going way back before, well, not before Israel, but you could even say even after the time even after the temple was destroyed, there's always been conflict in the Middle East. Even when there's no Israel there has always been conflict in the Middle East. Always. I know a lot of people like to say it's Israel doing this and that, but if you understand, there's also a lot of intramural contests going on in the Islamic and Muslim world. A lot of different power struggles going on between themselves. So it's not going to change, I just want to point that out because sometimes people get a knee-jerk reaction and say it's Israel causing all the problems, and I'm thinking, no, it's not, because I've read a lot of history back during the Roman times, and it's an interesting fact that there has been much conflict going on, and there's been much breaking of treaties, agreements, backstabbing, and you name it. Intrigue to the max. It's been the watchword of the Middle East, and it looks like Qatar and the UAE is very, very much worried about their neighbors. So that's another thing to factor in besides Syria, Iran, or Iraq, and all this other stuff. So it's a mess. When it goes up, like I said, I think the oil barons in the United States realize what's coming up, and they're probably fostering it to happen. They're going to be ready they already are ready with full production, I think, of oil in the U.S., and they want to be able to export it at the top dollar prices and make as much money for it as possible. So when that happens, though, when you got the budget crisis probably coming up again here for fiscal year 2015, when they got to iron out the budgets like they did last year, and they closed down the government temporarily, who knows what they're going to do again. And it looks like our President Obama's got more issues coming up. Now, I know he was been stopped at the Supreme Court level with some of his appointees, and they're also talking about stopping him by because he's been running things by executive order and circumventing the law. But this latest, I don't want to dwell too much on this allegation about what Joan Rivers said in the Michelle Obama dimensions, and she does, and Obama's former nanny who was a transsexual or something in Indonesia and all that. But I think that is going to factor in on Obama possibly getting impeached. Like it won't be that issue. It won't be that issue. It'll be something else. But it may be something where he's getting a little more impetus, where they're actually going to impeach this guy maybe for other things. It's like it's never one thing. It's almost like a whole bunch of different stuff, different things put together. We could even say that with the assassination of John F. K. You could say it was about the Vietnam, it was about the Federal Reserve, it was about him trying to, defund some of the military-industrial complex. It's actually a lot of different factors that come about to bring something. That's where something happens. It's usually not one thing. It's not one thing in itself. With Obama, I'm really kind of suspecting he's not going to last his term. I'm kind of suspecting that. And if that's the case, it's probably going to be where they go to Republicans next time, and maybe it'll be Romney. I'm not saying rah, 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 because I'm actually going to vote for a third party again, and it'll lose, but I'm not voting for Republicans or Democrats, period. But just stick with your metals. The metals are solid. I look at the stocks as it's like a castle made in sand, one big wind, and it's gone. Dust in the wind, Just like Jimi Hendrix says, they wash into the sea eventually. And that's really what's going to happen with the stocks. Now, that does not mean people who are investing properly in paper, people who understand when this market trend is going to occur. Like I've been saying, George Soros has been holding a very large bearish bet on the S&P. Yeah, that's paper. He's going to make money, and he's going to make money on paper. I'm just saying that the stock market is way, way, way ahead of itself, and it's astronomically unbelievable that it's been going this long. But it's an unpopular thing to say. But I have to compare that to what Grantham used to say about the Japanese stocks when they were doing great in the 80s and all that stuff, and they had their massive correction. He warned about it. They kept going up. He was very unpopular, and eventually he turned out to be 100% correct. People don't see it because they're living in the right here and now. But you want to plan ahead, and silver is an excellent investment right now at these prices for planning ahead. So over and out, and stay true to the cause.